when you're teaching your learners, do you let them decide where to sit, or do you force them to move around and sit with different people? What does it depend on? Depends on how naughty. I've got no concerns about naughtiness here, of course. Yeah.
No, I don't know.
I mean, I never really felt comfortable forcing people to change where they sit, and I won't do it today. But if anyone wants to change where they're sitting, I'm sure no one will take it personally if you move away. But that's completely up to you. Up to you. Maybe after the break, you can sit with different people and benefit from a wider range of experiences. Okay. Okay. Are there any questions you have, or comments, or anything that came out of the first half of the morning?
If the research is not made public, it's not research. Does that include also passing our research on to colleagues?
So the question is about what do we mean by making public, and this is a sort of a preview to something we'll cover later. But there are many ways of making research public, both oral and written, and formal and informal. So talking to your colleagues about your work is sharing. That counts. Okay? So we're not just talking about publishing in a research journal. That's just one way of sharing. And again, that's another misconception very often, that the only way of reporting is to write the article, which puts a lot of ELT professionals off, because for various reasons. The idea is that it's shared in some way with some other people. Okay? And we'll look at different ways of doing that. Yeah.
Just as a comment, the comments that you made earlier, I found very welcoming about qualitative research as well, and how it is an important aspect of research. Just a little anecdote, which just to share with people, is that when I did my master's dissertation, as you well know, it was entirely qualitative. And the main reason why I chose to do it, first of all, I chose to go down the qualitative road was, you guessed it, I'm not very good at maths. So I was really worried about all these statistical systems, etc. And plus, because of the personality that I am, that's what I wanted to do. And the kind of research I was into lent itself, the purpose lent itself to qualitative research. And after I'd done my research and presented my dissertation, I was asked, is there anything that you would change if you were going to do this again? And I actually said, I don't think I'd do qualitative research again, a whole thesis, because it was so time-consuming, it was so difficult. And it's surprising, really, that it is looked down upon by so many people, by so many academics, because in many ways it is much more time-consuming and in some aspects more difficult than, I find, than quantitative research. That's all.
Yeah. As I say, you can try, but you're not going to get me to take sides in terms of qualitative, quantitative, okay? But yes, both offer different types of challenges. But it's fair to say, as Alan's illustrated, qualitative is not a soft option, an easy option. Okay? It's quite demanding in its own way.
How is qualitative measured?
How is the quality of qualitative research measured? Well, when you present qualitative findings, you're doing it narratively, typically. Okay, you're doing it narratively. So let's say you've interviewed some teachers, for example. When you report your results, you're not summarizing their interviews into tables and saying, this is how many times they said this word or whatever. You're trying to capture the content. So you're presenting it narratively with lots of quotes, which in a way tell a story. That's why we very often talk about narrative in qualitative research. So you're looking at the quality of the narrative. How well does that communicate the findings of your study? How well does it tell the story in a way that sheds light on your research questions? How well does it communicate the experience of the people you're researching to the audience? Those are the things we're looking at, in a sense, in the story. There are others which we'll come back to a bit later. But the point is it's assessed in a very different way to statistical research.
But you can still do something like a SWOT analysis, no?
Yeah, but I think we're going back to sort of management research, marketing research, educational research. SWOT analysis is a technique we use in organizations for various reasons, to develop strategy or whatever. I wouldn't see SWOT analysis as a research strategy in the sense that we're talking about it today. I wouldn't say, how am I going to collect my data? I'm going to do a SWOT analysis. So it's a strategy which is used, but I wouldn't say it's a strategy for educational research. I will look at some strategies a little bit later. Anything else you want to pick up on before we move forward? Keenan, sorry, you had your hand up.
I had a similar experience.
A similar experience. Okay, well, give us your story too.
Research in my PhD.
You want to hold that microphone a bit closer, maybe? Yeah.
There was a quantitative committee member. I can say quantitative. Aston knows about him, and they criticized my research being purely qualitative rather than including any numbers of
Yes.
events or experiences of these teachers. So I had to put some numbers after the committee criticism.
Okay,
Yeah.
So this is a case in Turkey where there's still quite a dominant quantitative tradition, I guess. And Keenan was presenting his qualitative PhD, and he had to, otherwise they wouldn't have signed off his thesis. He had to include some numbers somewhere. I guess the comment was that in the first version, the only numbers were the page numbers, and clearly that wasn't enough to keep the committee happy. Okay? Yeah.
So today he says imagination is important.
Yes. So he had to be particularly imaginative. I mean, it's unfortunate this happens, of course. It shows us limited understandings of research by those who are very often in charge. But such is life, such is life. I do lots of these workshops with ELT professionals or language teaching professionals, and I always say it would be good to do them with academics as well, because they very often do need some help in broadening their views of what research is. Okay, so keep on trying. Okay, so let's move forward. So planning, conducting, and reporting are three sort of broad stages of research. We'll look at things we can do to enhance quality at each stage. And as I said, cutting corners at the planning stage is a recipe for disaster generally. Okay? So, I get people coming to me, they're saying, oh, look, I need to do this questionnaire. Well, okay, when, by? Well, I was hoping to send it out tomorrow. It just doesn't work. You can't just cook up things overnight. You do need, when you're planning what it is you're going to do, you need to make sure there's time for the plan to take shape. Okay, plan to take shape. Now, on your handout there at the top of page 5, one of the issues we need to do at the planning stage, of course, is define a focus. But there are some others. There's defining a focus. There's developing a rationale. A rationale is really a justification. Why are you going to do it? And as we said earlier, there needs to be a purpose for research. I'm still amazed at how many people I work with, and I say, okay, well, what's the purpose of the research? Why are you doing this? And they don't have an answer. They don't have an answer. They have to go away and think about it. So developing a rationale is part of the planning stage. Doing a literature review, we'll talk briefly about that. That's something that normally happens early on. Defining objectives or research questions, and then thinking about the design more generally. These are all things we need to do at the start of a project. Now let's think a little bit about the topic. And this came up earlier about, Dornier said we need good ideas. But what constitutes a good research topic? And there are two questions there I'd just like you to focus on briefly. Questions 1 and 2. Don't worry about 3 for now. We'll do that together. But 1 is, what criteria might be used to assess the quality of the focus or a topic of study? So how do we identify a good topic? And the second one, what are your views about the quality of those 3 topics listed there? Okay, so first of all, what are some criteria for a good topic? And second, maybe apply those to those 3 examples. So talk about that for a while, please, and then we'll discuss. To who, though? Okay, yeah. Just try and expand on those. Relevance and usefulness, but to who? If your colleague said, well, how would you, why is that a good topic? How would you justify it? So, finding a good quality topic, really important, but we need to sort of be clear about what good means. So let's not use the word good, let's break it down into more specific characteristics. Shall we just go around the tables and get maybe one idea from each table? One idea from each table. Don't rattle off 3 or 4. We'll come back to you if there's more. So shall we start from here? Just one.
I mean, we talked about, in terms of quality of research, we talked about personal commitment and personal experience.
Okay. Is that 1 or 2? It's very hard, isn't it, to get people to say 1?
Personalized, we say.
Okay, personalized. So a good topic is personalized, which means?
Which means the researcher should decide on the topic, I mean, in relation to his experiences.
Okay, so connected with the researcher's experience and interests, maybe. Okay, so in a sense you're saying it has to be relevant to the researcher. Is that correct? Okay, is that a correct way of summarizing it? A good topic is one that is relevant to the researcher's interests or experience. I'd say yes, but. Okay, and I say yes, but because we may be very passionate about something, but no one else is. And because research is a public activity ultimately, which is trying to make a public contribution, and because you need to share it with an audience at some point, passion, personal passion, is desirable but not enough. I mean, people can come up with all kinds of wacky topics to study. They may be very passionate about them. But very often in my work, I have to take them away from those topics because clearly no one else is going to be interested, okay? So I'm not saying it shouldn't be connected to your personal interests, but it's not just about me. You know, there's a bigger picture here, okay, to think about. Okay, let's have one from this table, please. I see the microphone's been placed in the middle there, like no one wants to touch it. Just one.
I think we choose relevance.
Relevance. Okay, let's take relevance. I think everyone had relevance on their list. And then the question is, what do we mean by relevance? Relevance in what sense?
Yeah, we will talk about relevance for academia or relevance for academia, relevance for teachers.
Okay, so relevance to a particular audience, a particular group of people. Yeah, it needs to be relevant to them. If it's not relevant to anyone, why are we doing it? Okay, so again, relevant to who? We need to make it relevant to an audience. When you're writing a paper, I spend a lot of time reviewing papers for journals, and very often the research is okay, technically, but when you read it, it doesn't really connect in any way with an audience, especially if it's an international journal, which has an international readership. The paper has to connect with that international readership. So very often you have to ask the authors to do a bit of revision and to make the relevance of the research clearer to the audience. This happens quite a lot when people do research in a specific context. You know, I've done this research in Saudi Arabia, and the whole paper is about Saudi Arabia. What you have to say to people, well, the readers of this journal are not just from Saudi Arabia. And if you want to publish in our journal, you have to make the research more broadly relevant. Okay? So relevance is really, really important. It can be relevant to people. It can also be relevant to the field, in a sense, in terms of its topic. So if we thought about, you know, what topics are relevant in English language teaching today, people say technology. So that's an example of a relevance of a current topic, in a sense. You know, there's a lot of interest in it. So personal interest, relevance. Let's take maybe one from the back there. Oh, sorry, you've got the microphone. Let's do you, sorry. Just a word.
Maybe sort of examining something which hasn't been yet explored,
okay.
or
yes.
if it has been explored, adding something new to the research, building on it.
Okay, so something which hasn't really been explored, which we can call originality, I guess. Okay, even the word originality, we can unpack that, but we won't. So something original. Now, original doesn't mean no one in the universe has ever thought of it, because it's very hard to find anything that fits that category. Okay, originality It can be maybe a slightly different spin on an existing topic, or taking an existing topic in a slightly different angle, okay? But originality. I think the criteria for the award of a PhD in the UK do mention the word originality. To be awarded a PhD in the UK, the thesis must make an original contribution to knowledge. And this is something that worries students a lot, because they think it has to be, completely new, but that's not the case. So originality, yes? Personal interest, relevance, originality?
I think in our group we actually said more or less the same things. One point I wonder is, would it be fair to say that if there is no literature to review on the topic, then it's not going to fit the criteria of relevance to academia or anywhere else?
Okay. All right. What do you think about that? If there is no literature to review, that implies that you've thought of a topic that no one has ever done any work on. And as I said, it's possible, but we can think about why. But let's say, so the question is, can you have good quality research without a literature review, I guess is the question. What are your views on that?
You can, because all that's going to eliminate is your historical review part. So there's no previous historical review. That would be lesser enough. I'd have to wrap it.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit about the purpose of the literature review shortly, but it's not simply to provide a historical context, it's also to provide maybe a theoretical context. So I'm just trying to think of a topic. Have you got a topic in mind, Alan, where have you experienced this, where there's absolutely no literature?
No, it's just that I have several friends who work in the Department of Linguistics.
Yeah.
And often I wonder about the point of some of their research and how relevant. sorry.
Yes. Yeah,
and how relevant it is to anything beyond that rather restricted corner of academia.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah. No, it's a fair
pushing
comment.
the question then.
It's a fair comment. So, what people are very often concerned, particularly professionals who are interested in research, they're concerned about the literature review. Because when we think of literature review, we think of something, a big academic sort of exercise. My view is that it's always desirable to find out whether there's any existing work that's relevant to your topic. But the depth in which you need to do that will depend on the type of research you're doing. If you're doing a PhD, of course, you need to do a pretty detailed literature review. If you're a classroom teacher, doing research for professional development, of course, that requirement doesn't exist. It's still desirable to read, otherwise you risk reinventing the wheel. Someone's done something similar, and you're ignoring that and starting from scratch. If you've come up with a topic and no one's ever thought of it and no one's ever written anything about it, that may be because it's not worth researching. That's a possibility. So it's not that no one's ever thought about it, but they have, and they've realized it's not worth doing.
But it could be a cultural difference. Maltese, there aren't many, they might never have gone to that university.
Yeah, well, yes. I'm not simply thinking about sort of contextual differences, but in terms of a topic related to language education, So sometimes we might rejoice if we realize that no one else has studied it, but if we get beyond that initial euphoria, we might want to step back and say, well, is there a reason why no one has ever done it? And that might be useful. And there are a couple of examples on your sheet there, which we'll talk about in a minute. Okay, so relevance, so personal interest, relevance, originality, and do you have does any of the other little groups there have another one to add? Alan said we'd covered all of theirs. Was there anything else? Yes?
Another thing we touched on were the participants. You think about who the participants are in relation to the focus of the research.
Yes, how are we impacting them? Is it for the public good?
Okay, so again, relevance to the participants maybe, you're saying. Yeah. We don't really think enough about participants. As I said earlier, we tend to be a bit selfish. We see them as fodder, and we sort of exploit them, in a ways. But if we want to be really ethical, we should be saying, how is this topic relevant to our participants as well, not just to the final consumers of the research. Okay, my list covers many of yours. And this is by no means the final word. We can add the others you mentioned. So a good quote topic is timely. Yeah, some topics are timely, some topics are tired. Okay? I don't know, when people send me proposals about learning strategies, I sort of say, oh, this is so 80s, you know, which is maybe a bit harsh on them. But some topics are timely, they're fashionable, they're hot, and other topics are just tired, so not another proposal on X or Y. So capturing the mood of the time. You know, so what are people currently really excited about? And particularly if you're looking for support of one kind or another, particularly if you're looking for funding, of course, it's to your advantage to have a timely topic. People are going to be more willing to invest in it. Timely can also mean it's connected with current policy, so that your institutions may have particular interests, and those interests change over time. You know, fashions change, policies change. If you can find a research topic that is timely in terms of being connected to your school's policies and strategies, that's useful as well. Focused as well, not too broad. Not too broad. You know, I asked someone the other day, what are you interested in? She said, oh, my PhD is about motivation. Full stop. And I said, well, you know, I said, that's an awfully broad topic you've got there. It might be useful to narrow it down slightly, I said. Of course, not slightly, enormously. If it's too big, you lose sense of focus, you know. Originality we've mentioned, relevance we've mentioned. Practical. This is particularly important, I think, in education. Education is a practical enterprise. There should be something that people can do as a result of our research. At least at the end, we should say, well, you know, so what? What actions might be suggested by this research? What needs to be changed, or what might be changed, or what might be done? So some reference to the practical value of the topic, as opposed, I mean, Alan mentioned his linguistics buddies. They don't seem to have a practical purpose to what they're doing. And maybe they could say, well, because we're linguists, not applied linguists, I don't know. But in education, that's exactly what they say, see? But in education, it's hard to justify research which has no practical implications at all, okay? And something which is understudied, which I guess I could incorporate into original and make the list even shorter, yeah. But don't forget what I said about understudied, okay? If someone hasn't studied a topic, there may be very good reasons for that. Now, there are a couple, we have these three examples I put on the sheet, and these are, the first two are real examples that came to my attention quite recently. One of the things I get asked to do very often is, I don't know, a university in, I don't know, Saudi Arabia will contact me and say, so-and-so is applying for promotion. We need an external professor to review the dossier. Would you do that for us? And that means they send me their publications, the applicant's publications. I have to read them and write a report about, you know, whether I think they're good or not. And one I received recently, one of the publications was a published article in a local journal, admittedly, but it was about the relationship between language learning and musical intelligence. And as soon as I saw that, I said, you know, what on earth is this, you know? I mean, why would anyone want to study this topic? And I read the article hoping to have that question answered, but of course it wasn't. There was no justification for why. And all it was is that the author had found a questionnaire which measures, I don't know, language learning aptitude or something. He found another questionnaire which mentions musical intelligence, and he'd given them to the same group of students and then correlated the results. So technically it was fine. Technically it was okay. But in terms of why, and I do remember writing in my report, because the next paper was the relationship between language learning and mathematical intelligence. The same person. So clearly the questionnaire he had different types of intelligence. And he was just correlating, them with the language aptitude. There was no point in any of that. And I remember writing in my report, it might be useful for this person to find topics that other people, other than himself, are actually interested in. I don't know if they got promoted, they never tell you, but...
What's the author's academic background? Education or mathematics or music?
I think it was something like linguistics. Yeah. But as I say, this is an example. This was technically, there weren't any problems with the procedures. They'd done, the questionnaires were okay, the statistics were okay. But why? Why? It's absolutely, I mean, if we apply these criteria for a good topic, it doesn't tick any of them. No. They just wanted to get promoted, So it was the, we'll hand out a few questionnaires and get promoted sort of approach to research.
Isn't it possible that sometimes the research could start off not being particularly relevant or whatever, and then that triggers off some other...
Yes.
I'm thinking of an example, the discovery of penicillin.
Absolutely. That can happen. So you may start off with some, I'm going to explore this and see if it leads anywhere, and then you follow it. But in this example, but at the end of the paper, I had no idea why anyone would be interested in the connection between language learning and music. And if you do find a connection, what do you do? If you do find that higher levels of musical intelligence correlate with stronger aptitudes to language learning, what do you do? What do? You bring what, trumpets into your classroom? I don't know. So I'm being a bit facetious about this, but there wasn't any point to it. Another one I came across recently was the second one. Someone did a study.
I'm sorry, Simon.
Yes, sorry.
Could it be that sort of this kind of research is a result of the desperate need of individuals to actually find something which is in some way original, and therefore they have this contribution. They try to bring.
That's quite sympathetic of you. To. I mean, I'd see it as a result, unfortunately, of the huge pressure to publish that academics and professionals around the world are under. There's increasing pressure for people to publish at all costs. And one unfortunate result of that is that people aren't really thinking about the value of what they're doing. What matters is getting your, I think, Dan, you said yesterday you need 14 publications to become an associate professor at the University of Malta. So it becomes an exercise in, accounting without concern for the value, especially if when those publications are assessed, it's just whether you've published or not. And this is a trend around the world, unfortunately. Places like Iran, in particular Iran, the number of, the quantity, the volumes of research coming out of Iran, flooding all the international journals is just incredible. Most of it is pointless, unfortunately. But it's driven by this pressure on people to publish. In places like China, even school teachers have to publish. School teachers of English have to publish. And the problem is not with that. That's not the problem. The problem is they have to publish sort of academic work in academic journals. There are only certain journals they can publish in. And those journals won't accept sort of practical research, practitioner research. So it's all rather unfortunate, and that's what's driving, I think, this kind of thing. The second example, I'm just trying to remember where I read this paper. Yes, I was sent this paper to read recently, and the paper was about differences in male and female attitudes to, I've changed the topic there for some reason. It wasn't teaching grammar, it was teaching culture, but the same idea. And again, my first reaction when I read that is, I mean, if it was teachers' attitudes to teaching culture, generally, that I can see. But why males versus females? I mean, can anyone justify that for me? That explicit focus. This was from Iran. Yeah, Iran, yeah. Okay. Yeah. And again, I'm open-minded about reading the paper, hoping that that choice is justified, but it never was. It was just, I gave this questionnaire to everyone, and I compared males and females. And this is what males said, and this is what females said, and there were no differences in their attitudes. Well, wasn't that predictable? There's no theoretical reason, or even practical reason, to assume that males and females have different attitudes towards teaching grammar, or listening, or speaking, or reading. But
mathematically, they might, because students have a different attitude whether their teachers are male or female, same way as maybe a young adult or an old adult.
Well, yes, that's bringing in students' attitudes, though, but this didn't really do anything about that. It was just, I'm going to compare males and females, and I say.
How much time is there to teach grammar?
But that's a different variable, because presumably males and females, they teach in the same system, they have the same hours. It's another example of it was technically fine. The questionnaire was okay, the analysis were okay. I mean, okay, the results were predictable, but there wasn't anything wrong with that. But it's just the purpose. The big flaw, and this paper, if the editor accepts my review, this paper will never be published. The big flaw is in the choice of topic. From the outset, it's doomed because the focus is not a good one. There's no reason why we would want to focus on. I'm not saying there are cases where a comparison of males and females is justified, but in this case it wasn't. Right? And the third example, this paper was about differences between novice and experienced teachers' views about teaching writing. And again, we can see this, novices versus experienced, that's potentially interesting. This study was done in Southeast Asia. I can't remember whether it was Cambodia or Laos or something like that. Quite a big study, like 1,000 questionnaires to novice teachers, 1,000 questionnaires to experienced teachers, asking them about their attitudes to teaching writing, and then a comparison. But what was missing through the whole thing is, why are you doing this? And what are you going to do with the results? There was nothing about that. Absolutely nothing. So again, technically, good. In terms of scale, impressive. But real value, pretty minimal. Pretty minimal. So I'm giving you these examples just to emphasize how important it is to get the topic right. Because if the initial topic, the initial choice of topic is misplaced, you can be technically perfect all the way through, but then when you send your paper to a journal or you talk about your research to people, the reaction is going to be, why did you do this? Or so what? Or what are we supposed to do with these results? Okay? So the choice of topic is, in my opinion, one of the most critical things. So do think carefully about your topics. The other issue, just to move on, in terms of the planning stage, so choosing a topic is very important. We mentioned the literature review earlier, and we haven't got a lot of time to spend talking about the literature review. But it is clearly an area, particularly in papers submitted to journals, where there are very often problems. And I've just given you an extract here from, this was done a while ago, but I think it still applies today. This writer, I'm looking at point 3 on page 5, Alton Lee. She was the editor of a journal, quite an important journal called Teaching and Teacher Education. She was the editor of that journal for a while, and one year she decided to look back over reviews written by reviewers of articles. So she looked at 142, and she looked at what comments the reviewers were making. And she found a number of sort of recurrent problems that were mentioned with literature reviews. And I've just simplified it here on the slide so you don't read the whole thing. But she talked about these problems with literature reviews. Insufficient literature, so not enough sources. Dated sources. This is something I always look for. When I'm sent a paper, very first thing I do, I go to the back, I go to the reference list, and I look through the dates. And if the most recent one is 1995, or even 2005, to be honest, there needs to be a good reason for that. It may be that there hasn't been much more recent research, and it can be justified, but generally we don't want the literature review to be dated. It's always good to stick 2014 in there somewhere if possible. And not linked to subsequent studies. So the research that is done is not connected in any way with the research that's been reviewed. So the idea is I read what other people have done, and I use that to inform my research. What I read should inform what I do, should give me some direction. But very often, the literature review doesn't seem to play any role at all in what the researcher subsequently does, which raises the question as to why did you do the literature review? Well, you stuck it in there because that's what the journal expects, but hopefully we can go beyond that. So the literature review has a real purpose to play in our work. It gives us direction. It identifies what's already been done, what's already known, what questions need to be studied further. So it's a valuable resource for us.
It can also give you an insight into raw data, accessible raw data.
Yes, it can as well. It can give you that kind of information. And then brandishing of names was another problem. Brandishing of names. So, research is just sort of name dropping. I read this guy, and this girl, of course, and that girl, but with no real depth to show that you've actually engaged with this. Failure by authors to critically interrogate the literature they reviewed. And that's important. A good literature review is critical. It doesn't just summarize what you've read, but it's critical in the sense it's saying, well, so-and-so said this, so-and-so is saying the opposite, so there's a bit of a tension here. Or so-and-so said this, but when you look at their instruments, they're a bit dodgy. Or so-and said this, but that was based on a sample of 1 in China, so it's not really representative of the Chinese population, etc. So being critical is important. That's all I'm going to say about the literature review, unless you have any specific questions, but I've included some links at the bottom of page 5, which may be useful. There's on my website, I keep a list of freely available, good quality online journals. Because professionals very often say to me, we don't have access to university libraries. We don't have access to subscription journals, which I understand is an issue. But there are a good number of quite good quality journals available online, which anyone can access free of charge. So if you go to that link there to my resources at the bottom of page 5, you can see those. And then there are also a few links which are specifically about preparing literature reviews for those of you who may need to do this. As I said, not everyone needs to write a big literature review, but for some of you it may be something you need to do. There are some useful sites there. Tools for preparing literature reviews is the first one. The second one, why do I have to have a literature review? Good question. Getting started and doing a literature. So there are some resources for you to follow up. Do you have any questions or comments on the literature review? Because I won't be coming back to that particular topic today.
Is there a notion that the literature review in quantitative data is more important compared to qualitative data?
Okay, is the literature review in quantitative research more important than the literature review in... So are you saying it's what? Less necessary to have it in a qualitative study? Is that the question?
That's the question.
That's the question, yeah. Any thoughts on that? Is a literature review less necessary in qualitative work? Could I ask what the thinking or what the stimulus for the question is? Have you been told this by someone?
I've just started an MA in ELT, and I read, this was the topic that came up in the class.
Cresswell.
Is it Cresswell?
Cresswell.
Yeah.
Cresswell said this?
Yeah, that quantitative data should be, the literature review should be more extensive.
In quantitative, it should be more extensive. I mean, I don't see any reason for that. I don't. No. I mean, the literature review serves a similar, the same function, whatever the research type of research is. Okay, it's just really understanding what's already been done that's of relevance to your work. Now, one explanation for that is that because qualitative research tends to be exploratory and quantitative research tends to be, I don't know, confirmatory, You're trying to maybe confirm a hunch or a hypothesis. Some people would say that with qualitative research, you shouldn't read too much because it narrows down your exploratory lens, in a sense. In other words, reading too much can limit your vision. That's something I've read sometimes. In extreme views, people have said you shouldn't read anything if you're doing qualitative research until you collect your data, which I think is a load of nonsense, personally. Because it is important to know what's already been done. You can't ignore what's already been done and design your study blindly. So I mean, Cresswell is an authority, of course, but I disagree with him. Has anyone had experience here of writing literature reviews? Happy or less happy?
Yes, but I can't really remember.
Okay, so that's a less happy one. All right, so you can't remember it. Alan?
It was something to do with this autumn.
Was that for your MA as well, Alan?
Yeah, I was very happy. It was qualitative, and it was quite in-depth and quite long.
Yeah.
And I found it very, very useful to put my data and research into some kind of focus.
Yeah.
Actually, I found it very helpful.
Yeah.
So I think I would, if that's what Cresswell says, then I think I too would disagree.
And I don't want us to talk about a qualitative literature review or quantitative literature. For me, there's no such thing. There's a literature review, okay, which serves a particular purpose, irrespective of the type of study. Its length and depth will vary depending on the kind of work we're doing, but
I understood that statement by Cresswell in the way that in qualitative research, you focus on very specific and narrow topic. So you might not,
you're working with 4 to 3 people or 5 people, so you may not find relevant literature on this, and you need to build up your own understanding. That might be the reason.
That's a different argument, yeah. The argument to say that with qualitative research maybe there might not be as much literature, that's a slightly different thing, yeah.
I think you meant this.
That's a different argument, yeah. That can be the case. I started my PhD in 1994. It's 20 years now, isn't it? And when I started, I became interested in how teachers teach grammar and why. That was how I got into all this research on teachers' beliefs and all of that. But it was grammar originally that I was interested in. And I was interested in how teachers teach grammar and why they teach grammar in certain ways. And I started, of course, dutifully doing all my literature review, and I couldn't find anything. I was reading all the big books by Ellis on second language acquisition, the study of second language acquisition, purple, green, or whatever color it is. I've seen blue ones as well. And Ellis had a big chapter on formal instruction, on teaching grammar. I read all of that, and there was nothing I could find about what teachers do in the classroom. There was a lot about what teachers should do, but actual studies of what teachers do, couldn't find any. And studies of why they do what they do, nothing either. And it took me a while to find that in education more generally, there was a lot of this kind of work in mathematics, in science. That kind of work had been around since the 80s. But in language education, there was hardly anything. So my literature review was short, simply because there wasn't much specific literature. I mean, I talked about the broader stuff, but in terms of the work on language education, there wasn't any. And if it isn't there, you can't invent it. Inevitably will be short. Okay. All right. Okay, the other important task to do at the planning stage is defining your research questions. Once you've got your focus, once you've familiarized yourself with what's available and narrowed down and become clear about what you want to do, we need to translate our purposes into questions. Research questions are really important. And writing good research questions is a bit of a headache. Okay, don't expect to do it in one sitting or one day. Those of you who have had the experience know it can be quite challenging and painful to go through them several times. But we do have some criteria which can guide us. And at the top of page 6 there, some of you may be familiar with Bryman's book on social method research, one of the most widely used general educational research textbooks, and he talks about criteria for research questions. We've got some criteria here to help us evaluate research questions. I'll just go through them very quickly. They should be clear in the sense of intelligible. In other words, when someone reads your question, the meaning of the question should be clear. They should be researchable. In other words, it is possible to answer them through research. Some questions are great, they just can't be answered. They should have some connection with established theory and research. This goes back to what we were just saying about the literature review. If you haven't engaged with what's already been written, how can you connect your research questions with what's already available? Okay? Your research questions should be linked to each other. If you have more than one, if you have 3 research questions or 4 research questions, they should be connected. It's one study, not 4 separate studies. They should, at the very least, hold out the prospect of being able to make an original contribution, however small, to the topic. So the potential to make a modest contribution to knowledge. We're talking about drops of water in the ocean here, okay? Not oceans. That's a contribution, a drop of water. And the research questions should be neither too broad nor too narrow. And then there's a similarist in an author called Punch. And the only additional one he adds there, it says there, research questions should be, the term he uses is substantively relevant. My gloss on that is not trivial. Okay. They should be worthy of the time and effort we're going to invest in them. Not trivial. Okay. So you've got some research questions there, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Could you have a quick run through those questions and evaluate them using the above criteria? Don't worry about the criteria which says they should be linked, because these are all individual questions. So these aren't going to be linked because there's only one. But are they clear, are they researchable, etc. Okay? I'll give you a few minutes to have a quick run through those, please. Now, the first point to make, it's always easy, as you know, to critique someone else's work. So although the flaws in some of these questions will be glaringly obvious to us, that doesn't guarantee that when you're writing your own research questions, you will avoid these pitfalls. Okay, it's always easier to critique someone else's work. But still, it's a useful exercise to do. So where do we start? Yes, where do we start? Do games improve language learning? Do games improve language learning? Good question. I mean, is it clear? No? What is not clear about do games improve language? Which of those 5 words? Oh, okay, all right, okay, all right. So yeah, it's not specific enough, is it? So it's clear, but it's not focused, perhaps. What kinds of games? Basketball? Baseball? Presumably language learning games. Or even that's very big. And yeah, and what does language learning mean? That's the universe, isn't it? As far as we're concerned. So just far too big. It's like the person who said to me they wanted to study motivation. It's too big. And what do I mean by improve? It's remarkable how often the word improve pops up in research questions. But what does improve mean? In other words, how is improvement going to be measured? Is it improvement as demonstrated on a test or what? Okay, so yeah, well, once you work out what aspect of language learning you want to focus on, you might want to collect some baseline data first, before and after, maybe. That's a design issue, I think. That's a design issue. But clearly the question has potential, but it's just too big, too broad to be...
Sorry, I see this question as a question to brainstorm more than anything else.
Okay, so let's distinguish between questions to brainstorm and research questions. Okay? If you want questions to brainstorm, they can be broad, but at some point you have to narrow them down. You have to make them specific. Lack of specificity in research questions typically reflects lack of specificity or clarity in our minds. So the exercise of narrowing down your research questions forces you to be more explicit and clear about what it is you want to do. Okay? But for brainstorming, by all means, yes. What is the volume of training needed to update teacher skills? This is a real one, actually. Most of these are real, but this one, I remember seeing this somewhere. What is the volume of training needed to update teachers' skills? It's just, you know, remarkably broad, impressively broad. You know, what do we mean by volume? How are we measuring that? What do we mean by training? What do we mean by skills? What do we mean by update? Nothing's being defined here. And who are the, and which teachers? Which teachers, you know. So there's so much more you could do with that. What problems do first-year university students encounter in English-speaking activities? Again, what type of problems? Not psychological, presumably, to do with language learning. You know, I don't know, you could say which university, what kind of speaking activities. Again, same problems of breadth, yeah. Yes, which students and all of that. So making it more specific. How do teachers of English in Malta teach pronunciation? I did that one just for you. So. Yes, okay, first problem is we're assuming they do. Maybe they don't. So you really need, do they teach pronunciation? And if so, how? So questions which are based on assumptions can be dangerous if the assumption isn't justified. I very often get proposals which say, my question is, why are my students demotivated? And my response typically is, how do you know they're demotivated? And the response I get is, well, I just know. Well, that's not good enough. Yes, maybe the question is, you know, first find out how motivated they are, and then, if they're not motivated, you can explore further. So how do teachers of English teach pronunciation? Assumes they do, but let's assume they do. Which teachers? Yeah, I mean, is it all teachers? I mean, okay, relatively speaking, Malta is a small place, but still, a study which tries to cover all teachers is just not feasible. Yes, yes, yes. And then which, so you have to specify which teachers. Yes, you have to teach. And what does teach pronunciation mean? That can mean lots of different things as well. There are many different levels of teaching pronunciation. So you might want to have a specific focus. Okay. This is another one I got from China, I think, recently when we asked some teachers to write questions. How can we use online learning to improve students' writing ability? Sorry. Again, what does online learning is such a big thing? All sorts of things come under that broad heading, okay? Which students, what do we mean by writing, how is improvement going to be measured, okay? Relationship between proficiency in English and the occupation of the great-grandfather. Well, is the question clear? Do we understand the question? Yes. Is it specific? Yeah, okay. Is it researchable? Can we actually obtain the data to answer the question? Possibly in Malta, because the registry or the archive, they're quite good at getting all this stuff. Okay, so on those three we're okay. Is it sort of worthy of our efforts? Yeah, I mean, so what? I mean, why would an English language teaching professional, how could you justify investing time, energy, resources into this? What's the value of finding out that, you know, if your great-grandfather was a sailor, you're better at English?
Oh, maybe he was English, though.
Well, yeah, what can you do with that? What can you do with that information? Yeah, what can you do with that information? Well, yeah, you find a connection between being a carpenter and what can you do with it? What challenges do EFL teachers in Malta face in helping their learners become more autonomous? This is a real question, I think. What do you think about that one?
Good brainstorming question.
Okay. How could we improve it?
It's based on an assumption that there might be challenges.
Okay, so so we will, again, avoid the assumption. Ideally, you know, do teachers? Well, the difference between a hypothesis and a question is simply that the hypothesis is in the affirmative, and the question is in interrogative form. Okay? The hypothesis is a statement of what we assume to be the case. So, yeah, teachers face challenges in promoting autonomy would be a hypothesis, and then you can set out to test it. Alternatively, you can phrase it as a question. I've never used hypothesis in any of my work. It's always questions.
It depends. I mean, if you say sort of what challenges do EFL teachers in Malta face,
Mm-hmm.
help you become autonomous.
It's not a still not a hypothesis, it's a question. You'd have to reframe it. Hypotheses are always in the affirmative. Okay, that's the standard thing for them. Okay. So what can we do to that question to make it a bit better? If it's good for brainstorming, as Alan said, what can we do? And let's assume the answer is they do face challenges. What can we do to the question?
Perhaps make it more specific, a particular level of learners.
Okay, so what do EFL teachers in Malta teaching? I don't know, elementary students or intermediate or whatever the levels are these days. Okay, all right. So that's not the worst of the bunch, I guess. Where do students buy their stationery at the start of the school year? Now again, it ticks most of the boxes except the relevance one. It's trivial, unless you're planning to open a store, a stationery yourself, in which case this is more sort of marketing or business-oriented research rather than educational research. So doable, but yeah, not justifiable.
Is that a real question?
No, I made that one up, obviously. Yeah. You can spot the ones I made up. But they do make the point. It ticks most of the boxes. It's just the relevance and the
Sorry, going back to G, and what I meant was it's a purpose of a study question. You know what I mean? Your whole study could be that, or challenges.
Yes, it could be, yes. So it's a bigger question which we could break down, definitely. What spelling errors are most common in the English composition writing of first-year undergraduates at the University of Tokyo? Obviously the most specific of them all. It could probably be even made more specific if you wanted to, but you know, that's a reasonably good question. So another example I use sometimes is the question, why do weak students get low scores? Why do weak students get low scores? You know, there's a cyclical logic within the question that doesn't take you anywhere except round in circles. You know, they get low scores because they're weak. You know, I mean, it's you know, is it? And you know, what does weak mean? And there's all sorts of things. So I've seen that kind of question a few times as well. So as I said, it's quite easy to spot the flaws in other people's work. It's the same like in writing questionnaires. Someone gives us a questionnaire. It's incredible how easily we spot all the flaws. But then when we sit down and write one ourselves, we commit all the standard errors there. Okay, so but it's still a useful exercise to do just to raise awareness. So if you're writing research questions now or any time in the future, do keep those kind of criteria in mind and apply them in order to improve the questions you write.